Hey, welcome back to the Edge series. This series of videos is about the trading edge that I'm using today. And today's video is on order flow and specifically the tool called Auction Vista. And please remember this video is for educational purposes only. Take a look at the disclaimer and also go back and look at the rest of the videos in the series. I'll include a link here. It's important. They are in sequential order. So if you're coming on and finding this video last, go back to the playlist, take a look through the playlist first and before you get down to here. Now, assuming that you've already watched the videos, you've seen this slide several times already, and you know that the framework I'm using is called NADRO from Apteros Trading. You can go there for some great educational resources. And what we're talking about today is we're talking about order flow, which is the last component of NADRO. And it's the component that helps me to actually access a trade idea that's based on the framework. Okay, so this is really where I look to figure out how to execute a trade idea. Now, I've talked several times about order flow and the tools I used. Tools I use today, cumulative delta is one. It's really great for kind of a macro view and a macro picture of what's happening with order flow. So I can see major absorption. I can see when one side's more aggressive than the other side over the course of a session. When I'm looking at footprint, I'm looking for really specific turns that are happening in areas of interest that I have, and I get really good fidelity on the aggressor and what's happening with the aggressors. Auction Vista and another tool like it called Bookmap really give me an idea of depth of market, which is where are the big resting orders at. And I want to be able to see that major players are in my areas of interest as well, waiting for price to come down. And so the depth of market is really cool to look at in conjunction with footprint and cumulative delta. So here's Auction Vista and what Auction Vista looks like. Here's a really kind of basic view of Auction Vista. And what you can see is you have a price chart, just a basic price chart, right? And you can see the prices here. You can see these circles. These circles are basically aggressive traders hitting into the bid or the ask, right? And so you can see where traders get really aggressive in a particular move. And then I have all of these lines, gray lines, dark gray lines, light gray lines, white lines. That is an indication of the depth. So the darker the line, the less depth there is there. In other words, the fewer resting orders are there. The whiter the line, so as you get to this really white line right here, that's really thick market depth resting right there. And market depth tends to be both a magnet as well as a resistance force. So it will attract price, but also resist price at the same time. So it has really cool effects when you get around these liquidity zones, as I call them. Okay, that's kind of how you read Auction Vista at a very kind of basic level. Bookmap is similar. So Bookmap is a different tool. Auction Vista is built by Jigsaw Trading. Bookmap is another tool. You can see the same kind of stuff. So you can see the liquidity zones, right? Here's a liquidity zone, a different color scheme, and you can change your color scheme at Auction Vista as well. But Bookmap has this kind of really cool color scheme out of it. They also handle the circles differently, so much more granularity around the circles. Size of the circle matters, right? So you can kind of see where the bigger volume comes in and where smaller aggressive volume comes in as well, right? So same idea, just different implementation, different visualizations that you can see from Bookmap. Now, my Auction Vista setup is a little bit different than what I showed you before. What I like to do is I like to really get rid of all the noise that's in my Auction Vista. I only want to see the thickest parts of the book, the major areas of destination. If I were scalping, maybe that would be a little bit different, but for my purposes, I want to see these major zones here. Settings are configurable. So if you take a look up here, really these don't matter. Up here, the interval and interval width, that just tells me how many bars I can fit into a view. But Circle Tuner is the sensitivity of when circles are going to show up here. Okay, so I have this set to 3. fairly not sensitive. You can increase the sensitivity. You'll get a lot more of these circles, right? You can decrease a little bit and get fewer. So I usually hover around 2 to 3 on my circle tuner. I just want to see when the really big volumes start to come in. Depth tuner I have set to 7. So obviously I've gotten rid of a lot of the depth in here, and I'm really looking at the biggest resting order levels, and that suits my needs, and I'll talk about how I use that. Depth scope just tells me how many points away from where I'm currently at does the depth actually show up, and kind of gives me an idea of distance from current price. So that's my setup. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how I use Auction Vista. The first concept to talk about is called leaning. What are we leaning on? Okay. Now, in just that same view that you saw before, I want to be able to lean on the current liquidity zone. Okay. So in the case of something like this, in the dome, you can see where liquidity is. So at any given moment, you can see how much of market depth there is at any given level. But what Auction Vista does is it gives me depth over time, and it creates these zones. So I know right here, this is a liquidity zone right here, okay? Because I've got this big, rich market depth area right here. And so I know, first of all, that price is probably going to come up here. It wants to come up here and test it and see if that's just for real. And when it tests it, it is probably going to reject, even if it's just a little bit. Not always. We'll talk about that in a second. But this is a current liquidity zone, which means it's here, it's been established, it's pretty thick, and price really hasn't broken through it yet. Okay. Now, I can also use and lean on prior liquidity zones. So here's an example where you have this liquidity zone that was here, pretty well established, pretty thick zone. You have another one above it, right? So this is my current liquidity zone because it's still there. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing here. It's like the liquidity is gone. Well, that could be where that liquidity was pulled as an attempt to bring buyers up to that point, even though they're still there, right? And so you can kind of see what happens where they kind of pull orders up here, and then all of a sudden the buyers come up and you see this big volume come in and the sellers take it down and push it down. So leaning on prior liquidity is something I look at as well. I also look at prior volume, big volume areas as well. So in this example, and we're going to see actually the whole setup here for this example also a little bit later. But in this example, we have this big run up here. We have this big zone right here, right? That's a supply or demand zone, depending on which way you're going. In this case, this is a supply zone. This is a demand zone because there's a lot of demand for this, and it pushes it up, right? And so you come up here and then we come down. And the question is at what point do you get down? I don't have a lot of liquidity zones that I can lean on. Maybe this one right here, but it kind of showed up late, right? This one, it looks great afterwards, but in the moment, it looks brand new, right? And so some of these brand new zones, I'm a little bit weary of. I want to see something that's been established a little bit longer. But what I do have is this right here. So I have this right here, this band, right? And if I just extend that all the way, notice what happens, right? It's exactly where price came down to retest this demand zone right here. And then we have kind of a move off of this. So I like to look at these areas as well as opportunities to lean on. And then obviously if I get both, where I get both a kind of a liquidity zone and I get supplier demand area, especially as it comes in, that's really great. This is more an example of just volume coming in versus having both, a supplier demand zone, right? This is creating the demand zone right here, which is awesome. So love seeing this kind of stuff that happens as well, because now I've got two things to lean on. from an Auction Vista perspective. Okay. Now, I don't use Auction Vista exclusively because there are some challenges with it that happen from time to time. So what are some of the challenges? Well, first of all, you get overruns of these areas. So just like they're magnets, there's an expectation that they'll hold, but that's not always the case. They don't always hold. Sometimes they get overwhelmed. So here's an example where this looks really good. We have this really big, massive, liquidity zone right here. It's been around forever, hasn't really been tested. Came close right here, but not quite. And we had a nice reaction. And we're coming back down here to test again. And the idea is that, okay, well, maybe we'll come down, we'll test again, kind of really dig into this, and then we'll keep going. We'll come back up to this one. Okay. But that's not what happens. We actually crash through it and it folds. And then we get a new one that develops here to really push the price down. Okay. Come back up, retest, and down. So sometimes we get overruns in these liquidity zones. The other thing that we could get is we could get these no-touch failures. So here's an example where we have both of an overrun. So you have the overrun right here. This was holding. This was holding right here. We came up, lots of volume. Normally this looks great, right? Normally I would say, this is great. I got both. I've got volume coming in and I've got a liquidity zone. Boom, we're going back down. Okay, that's not what happens. Obviously, we run up. And then there's the question of, well, okay, like, is this going to come up to here? Is it going to test this and then fall back down? So kind of expecting that. So getting in here is a little bit tricky because you think it might come back up to here, right? Obviously, this is the last hurrah and it turned right here, but it never came back to touch this. So this is, one of the challenges too, where sometimes you get these no-touch failures where it doesn't quite come and test a zone. So how do I solve that? Well, I use Footprint and Auction Vista together. So I'm actually looking at both. I do keep my Footprint chart on top of or above my Auction Vista chart. And I'm looking for both the Footprint patterns that I talked about in the last video, and I'm looking for these areas of interest, these liquidity zones or volume areas, supply-demand areas. And so here's an example of that same chart. So remember, we weren't quite sure how to get in, right? And so if we look at this first trade right here, that's right up here. Well, I didn't have any sort of confirmation that I should enter here. Remember, I'm looking for 1 or 2 bar patterns. This is a 3 bar pattern. Yeah, it probably could have worked, right? But it's not a pattern that I typically look at, okay? But as it comes back up, as price comes back up here, okay, we're coming back up to here, coming back up to here that way, then what we have is we have now this volume node right here, and we have this high quality footprint bar that prints as well. Remember, footprint bar is high quality. When we go down, we've kind of gone above that prior bull bar, so we kind of create an up thrust pattern, and then we have bearish delta at the same time that comes in. So perfect high quality footprint bar that confirms this, as well as Auction Vista working together to confirm the move down. Now let's take a look at some of these just example trades. So June 28th, 2022. Now I'm not going to go through a full NADRO hypothesis review and acceptance and all that kind of stuff, but we'll just talk briefly about some of these. So first of all, what kind of condition are we in here from a NADRO perspective? Well, this is my line in the sand, okay? And typically I want to be bull above or bear below, okay? And this is my developing value area, which is beginning to go negative right through here. And so we have this really strong move. We have this fake out here, right? So maybe there's a bull opportunity here, thinking this is going to go back up, but it doesn't do that. It actually fails, and we come down and then back up. So we create acceptance here. We have nice rhythm. So we have this nice move here. And now the question is, when do I get in? Do I get in, maybe here? Or do I get in maybe on that red bar? Or how do I get in on this green bar right here? So there's a question about how do I really time the entry here. Now I will point out, order flow being the last component of NADRO means that it also is to some degree the least important. You don't have to have a perfect order flow setup to take a NADRO oriented trade or trade idea or trade hypothesis. I just like to do it because I feel like it increases my win percentage and gets me into a trade that has usually really good risk reward associated with it. Okay, so in this case, I want to see and take a look at, well, what does order flow have to offer me? Well, in that first area, kind of that first red bar that we saw, we don't really have a solid trade here. We've got a lot of overlapping bars. We have this that came in. And then as we gone up, there's just nothing that triggers. We have this here that kind of almost triggers, but we have a 3-bar pattern here. So that's not really the best place to enter. What we do have though is we do have this right here. Okay, so that is a NQHQ footprint. If you go back and rewatch the video on footprint, and I'm looking to take it 3 points from here, right? And so I can trade anything from 3 points from that location right there, which means I'd get in somewhere, obviously here, probably on this bar, and take a little bit of heat on that, but not much, right? So from a footprint perspective, this is a really great entry. It has all the characteristics of what I need to be able to enter in that location. I also have a confirmation on Auction Vista. So here's my Auction Vista chart. And you can see that this is that move where we kind of came down, we kind of created acceptance, had this little move here, obviously, footprint didn't trigger well here, and neither did Auction Vista. Now this is where it's tricky, right? Because I did have this Auction Vista liquidity zone right here, but I don't have a corresponding footprint chart. I think that's somewhere around here. I don't have a corresponding footprint pattern that says that I should be getting in right then. But what I do get is I do get this kind of stuff, and I get this pop back up. So here's a kind of an up thrust pattern, and then I have this move down. Okay. What's great about this is that even though I could take this because I am right here along this zone, right? I can totally take it right there if I wanted to. Footprint allows me to time it a little bit better when the bears actually do come in, and after we have this little stop run that happened right there. Okay, so I get double confirmation here. I get confirmation that Auction Vista has a liquidity zone, and I get confirmation that on footprint I've got this pattern right here that I can lean on right there. Now the second trade, if we go back here and take a look at the second trade, same idea. We're in a trend down. We're just coming down this way. And what I'm looking for is, how can I get into this again? How can I get into this against my developing value area? Because I like to get in during those. Now this does come up, and the question is, do I get in early in case it doesn't touch my developing value area? Obviously, in hindsight, it does. This is the great spot. But if you're trading not in hindsight, right, which most of us are, then you got to wonder whether, hey, is this the actual trade that I should have taken? Because maybe it doesn't go back and test that. Or maybe this would actually go back all the way up to here and then come down. So again, taking a look at together Auction Vista and my footprint chart, this was that first idea move right here. And notice what I've got is I got a whole bunch of overlapping bars. This thing barely goes up and then comes all the way down. I mean, this is a totally engulfing bar. I would never take this as a high quality trade, high quality footprint pattern. What I would prefer is a high quality footprint pattern is something that looks like this, right? And then I would take a trade from right here. That would be really great. But that's not what I got. I got all this overlapping congested stuff, even though right here I had this nice move right up to here. Okay. Now, waiting a little bit longer though, as this comes down and then comes back up, now I have a much better footprint pattern here. I've got that NQHQ pattern, right? Really nice. I'm going to trade 3 points from here, get me in probably somewhere here, and I'm off to the races. And what do I have on to lean on? Well, again, I still have this zone that I'm leaning on, and I have the volume that came into that zone. I'm okay that it pops up to here. That's not a problem for me. If I have other things in alignment that are supporting it. Remember, I've got a really great NADRO location, a really great NADRO hypothesis going down. I've got footprint that confirms it. And so this zone, a lot of times what will happen is you'll see this kind of stuff happen where a zone will get kind of eaten up and it comes back and retests it. And it may retest it short. It may just come back and retest and then go down from here, or it might poke up above, take out the stop losses, and then continue on from there. Okay, and that's what it did in this case. So this is a good example of where we had a little bit of an overrun, but the area was still valid, and we got a good confirmation on footprint. Okay, so now let's take a look at June 22nd, 2022. So here's a really great NADRO setup where you've got, and this is the open, and in the open it comes up, it goes right up to our line in the sand. Okay, so this is a bearish line in the sand. Bearish doesn't mean I'm always going to be bearish for the day. It just means I expect this to go lower unless it fails. And we actually get the failure. We get the failure right here where this thing pops right through it and it's coming back down. And the question is, when do I get in? Do I get in here? Do I get in here? Do I get in here if it comes down all the way down here? Obviously, hindsight, this was the better move. But is there anything in order flow that clues me in that that's the best location? So taking a look at my auction Vista chart, absolutely. Because what I have here is this is my zone I'm leaning on. I showed this chart earlier, right? I'm leaning on this zone. This was my demand area. And not only that, but once that zone was created, notice I've got liquidity here, and I've got liquidity that continues here as well, right? So that liquidity left as price went up, and then it came back in as price started to come back down. Okay. Now, if I had just gotten in, right here as price came down blindly, then obviously I would have had an overrun all the way down to here. Okay. And I want to try to avoid those overruns. So the question is there anything in the footprint chart that lets me know that I should wait? Well, this is the footprint chart. And so as we're looking at the chart, like what I want to be able to see is as this thing is coming down, okay, so here's that first little attempt up, hadn't quite reached our demand zone, which was, right around here, this area, and we come back down to here. Now, as we come back down to here, we have this little poke below, right? And we have this HQ bar that forms right here because we have bull delta. It's a positive bar. It came below that prior bar that came down low, right? And it's also at my line in the sand. So really great entry here. And you could enter 3 points from right here, which gets you in right about here, and you only have a 3-point loss. So this is a good example where footprint really helps me to time when I'm seeing something in Auction Vista in case Auction Vista overruns or underruns. Here's another example. So we'll take a look at this example here on trade 4. So what we have is from a NADRO perspective, we're pretty much rotational all through here. So we're kind of choppy. Once we make this move here, though, we have kind of gone into this trending up mode. And the question is when do you get in? This, not so appealing because it's shallow. This is a little more appealing as it comes down, but we have this little move up and then we have this move up right here, right? And so the question is, how do I get in? One of the tricky things with this one is I always like to kind of lean on these developing value areas. This never came down to there, never really tested through it. So this is an example where it doesn't quite touch it. And so how do you time the turn on this? So if we take a look here, we have a really great confluence between what footprint is telling me and what Auction Vista is telling me. So on the footprint chart, we have either call this a medium quality or high quality bar, right? This is my turn bar. It is a bullish turn bar with slightly bullish delta. Not a lot of delta, not a lot of bullish delta. So maybe you call that a medium quality bar. It doesn't matter. It works. And then from an Auction Vista perspective, I have multiple levels of liquidity down here. And I remember this trade distinctly. I remember this shooting down to here and me getting trigger happy, wanting to get in right here, but I paused myself. I said, wait a second, that was a really steep move. Let's see what happens here. This came down to here, and then it came down. And then when we got all of that volume right there, I was really interested in getting in, and I re-entered lower when it came probably right around here, if I remember correctly. So made that perfect move as it came down here, and then started to come back up. I got back in, or got in for the first time. So love seeing these kinds of zones because you have really great confluence between what Footprint is telling you and what Auction Vista is showing from a depth perspective and from an aggressor perspective, which was really fantastic. So that's how I use Auction Vista. I use it in conjunction with Footprint. I use the two together because they really help to confirm each other as signals. I love Auction Vista. I think it's a fantastic tool and highly recommend it to anyone who's trading in thicker markets. I don't know how Auction Vista is working today with something like CL or NQ. And even ES has gotten quite thin over the last couple of years. If you take a look at some of my older videos, you can see Auction Vista. It's really thick. You can see the dome, how thick the dome is. We've gotten a lot more thin on ES lately. But it still works great. And that's how I do it. All right, traders, this is the end of the order flow and the NADRO series of trades. I might throw in a few other videos where we talk about some other topics, but this is the core of it. And now you know how I trade my trading edge. Till next time, happy trading.